Greenlee, Associate Director of 92Y Talks. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our event, David Duchovny in conversation with Pedro Pascal, The Reservoir, an Audible original. We're thrilled to host David Duchovny, award-winning actor, musician, writer, and New York Times bestselling author, to celebrate the release of his latest Audible original, The Reservoir. David's conversation partner is everyone's favorite bounty-hunting Mandalorian, Pedro Pascal. The two recently became friends on the set of the upcoming Judd Apatow comedy, The Bubble. This conversation is a wide-ranging and intimate celebration of creativity, the process of acting, and reflections on New York City during crises as presented through The Reservoir. This Audible original is set in Manhattan in the early days of the pandemic and is a brilliantly conceived, darkly funny caper of conspiracy and madness that probes the nature of virality in our age. David Duchovny is an award-winning actor, writer, director, New York Times bestselling author, and singer-songwriter, best known for his iconic roles as FBI agent Fox Mulder in Fox's The X-Files and Hank Moody in Showtime's Californication. With an acting career spanning over 2 decades, Duchovny is a 2-time Golden Globe winner and 4-time Emmy nominee. He most recently starred in the Blumhouse horror film The Craft: Legacy, directed by Zoe Lister-Jones. Duchovny grew up in New York City. He graduated from Princeton University summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in English literature. He then went on to receive an ABD in English literature from Yale University. Joining as conversation partner is Pedro Pascal, who fans will recognize from HBO's Game of Thrones, Netflix's Narcos, last year's Wonder Woman 1984, and as the titular character in the first 2 seasons of Disney Plus's hit series The Mandalorian. As always, we deeply appreciate your patronage, and thanks again for joining us for this very special 92Y event. David Duchovny in conversation with Pedro Pascal, The Reservoir, an Audible original. Thanks for coming.
So we're
Hi, David.
Hey, Pedro. It's really nice to see you.
It's really good to see you too, DD.
How are you?
I'm good, man. Where are you?
I'm in New York, close to the 92nd Street Y, right across the park from the 92nd Street Y. But it's too bad we can't do this in person. But another time.
I know.
Where are you?
Oh, I'm in Chile.
Oh,
Chile.
yeah. And how long are you going to be there?
I'm going to be here until towards the end of the month. Finish a little quarantine and then spend some time with my dad.
Nice.
And my brother and extended family.
Sounds wonderful. I mean, what we should tell people is Pedro and I we're not old friends, we're new friends. We just worked on a movie called The Bubble in London for Judd Apatow, and we kind of just it seemed like we'd known each other a long time for some reason, and we've just become really good, fast friends, I guess is how we describe it, or how I describe it.
Yeah, I would say the same. The funny thing is that my being such a consumer of movies and television, I felt like I knew you. I guess as many of us feel, without actually meeting you, and then working with you, and I mean we were basically like best friends within less than 24 hours, right?
It was well, like movies are a little like summer camp in a way. Sometimes, but you can also make actual, real, and lasting friendships on them sometimes.
Yeah, we had our honeymoon, and then it just lasted through the whole movie, thankfully.
And what I got to know about Pedro is a certain kind of really deep artistic process that I really appreciated. That he's a real artist, and he suffers like a real artist. But that's where the gold is. And
I don't know how much that's process per se, as it is neuroses. Because it's funny that you say that. I felt like part of you know, some of the best things about getting to know you was how it kind of, in a way, it sort of reacclimated me to you know, being passionate about your work,
Yeah.
And you know, being looking for inspiration and taking risks and accepting, I guess, in a way, a pretty intellectual process and overview of what we're doing as an ensemble, as a story, as an experiment, and processing so many of those things for the kinds of brains that we have. And so to have you there through that experience, it was like it wasn't a lonely one as it usually can feel like
a fellow sufferer, I guess, or a fellow neurotic. But what I did, you know, what I do love about you is that you care so deeply about what it is you're doing. I mean, that's not to say that you take it seriously. Like there's a very, you know, actors are always in danger of like taking themselves too seriously, and that's different from caring about what you do. And one of them I see as a little pretentious, and the other I see as the most beautiful thing you can do on this planet is to actually care. So what I see in you is not a guy that necessarily takes himself too seriously. I mean, you take yourself seriously enough, you know, you don't, whatever. But apart from that, you care so much. And that, to me, that's what it's all about, you know, and I think that's why I kind of like felt simpatico with you. You know,
it's crazy to be it's crazy to hear that from you, and I can't help myself so much of the time, and I know that it can be a little tiresome, the kind of
not tiresome.
The kind of, well, just the fan thing, because I wonder if you understand what it means to, and now suddenly this is all about me, and we're not going to talk about your writing at all, but it I wonder if you know what the feeling could be to be I guess seen by somebody that you admire so much. I mean, you know, you're a big deal. Is a really big deal when I was getting out of school, and so, you know, I really truly have followed your career, and so to work with you, to meet you, and then also be introduced to your writing is really special. You're going into the fact that there's an opportunity here to, you know, read this on the page and also to listen to you. Did you do the short story?
Yeah, I did. And reading, I've had experience now with, I've written 4 novels, so I've read them all as audiobooks. This is the first.
I've done that before. I did a few books, and it's not easy. I you know, the process isn't easy. Will you just talk a little bit about, you know, for people that don't know what it's like to
well, it's very interesting to hear you say that you've done that, because my stance towards reading my own stuff has been a little bit confrontational, right?
Because it's very musical. You say that maybe in doing the Audible yourself, there were moments that you discovered or you felt like a sentence ran on a little too long. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you're right. It didn't feel that way in reading it, because it had so much music and flow to it. It really was, you know, I think specifically that kind of an experience where you're with this guy, you're in the music of his experience. And one that reflects an environment that I can relate to so deeply, because I spent 20 years of my life living in New York. I can tell, you know, through your story, how much you understand New York, how much New York City is part of your DNA, having been, you know, born and raised there and spending so much time there, living there, and the nostalgia of it, one, and and the understanding of the way the city works and the way that it receives and experiences tragedy is a really, really emotional experience for me to hear it and see it through the lens of somebody who understands it in the same way as the reader being, me. And it's, I haven't asked a single question in all of that rambling, but can you just talk about that?
I think it was a question, but I mean, I want to go back to the beginning of it where we were talking about like musicality, and I think that it's kind of a stream of consciousness story. So you're kind of in this guy's head, in Ridley's head, and I mean, I haven't thought about it before, but if I have to think about consciousness, I would say it's probably musical. You know, it's not.
Yeah.
It's like ambient. You know, it's like rave music. I don't know what it's like. It's like, you know, it's got a beat, but it's also kind of
jazz, man. It's jazz.
It's also spacey, and so I think you know what you say about New York. Yeah, you know, like part of this is really personal because I've lived in New York. Well, again, I was raised here, as you say, yeah, but I've also lived here for the past 10 years and raised my kids in this apartment that I'm sitting in right now. And this apartment has the view that Ridley has. The story begins with this guy Ridley looking out his view over Central Park West, over the reservoir, and imagining or not imagining that he sees during the pandemic lockdown, where everything is dark at night, he sees in a rear window kind of a way, he sees, you know, a light flashing at him from Fifth Avenue. And he imagines, who is it? You know, is it a woman? Is it a man? Is it my destiny? You know, is somebody in need of help? You know, is it for me?
Yeah.
Is it my daughter? At one point he thinks. So that's kind of, you know, like I never had that fantasy, but certainly it occurred to me quite easily as I sit night after night, you know, looking out at that wonderful view. So there's definitely parts of me in it. And then when, you know, I kind of started it that way, not knowing where I was going to go, really not knowing exactly where I was going to go. And to get to what you refer to as the way, nostalgia, but also the way that the city, the way that people of New York City process tragedy, namely, you know, 9/11 or Trump, you could say, being a New York type of tragedy, or the tragedy of the last 4 years and the pandemic, definitely the tragedy.
And the pandemic and experiencing the pandemic there, yeah.
And the idea that, you know, the double-edged sword of the fact that these world-shaking events that we go through, whether personal, but no, I'm saying the huge social world-shaking events like a 9/11, like the last election, I think, and like the pandemic, definitely. You know, they hurt so very deeply, and yet they cause us on some level to rediscover our basic humanity, and in a way they cause us to rediscover a love of strangers, love of our own people, of our own family. And you know, New York is a city that's stacked on top of itself, and yet, you know, they always say how lonely it is. And what I found remarkable to me to try to get at and to try to write at was this sense of 6 feet away and 6 feet under, you know, the kind of concurrence of that mantra. You know, you're dead or you're 6 feet away. And that we live in this most congested of cities, and yet we're being told to stay away from each other, you know, physically. And I just found all that to be fascinating. I didn't know I was going to write a pandemic story. I didn't set out to write something like that. I mean, I don't see any reason to try to set out to write it, but I'm happy that I allowed myself to be led into that area. And then, you know, just to just to bring it into a personal sense, Ridley, this character's personal sense of having witnessed 9/11 and being aware of, as we all are, of conspiracy theories and all these kinds of answers that were given to why these big things are happening, and the human need to believe in an answer, the human need to watch, the human need to have a story that makes sense of this madness, whether it's 9/11 or the ballots or the pandemic or whatever, and to kind of put that all in the mind of a man who may be going crazy, who may have the virus, who may be dying, and it all kind of started to make sense. So I didn't know, like, I was going to go beneath the reservoir, and then the reservoir became, it's something that he's visually obsessed with, the surface of it, because it's beautiful. And then as he gets sicker or more delusional or smarter or whatever, he begins to go beneath the surface of the reservoir. And I love the play on the word of the reservoir, like it became to me the reservoir of all of us, what lies beneath and what feeds us, what makes us not thirsty or whatever.
Yeah. And I really didn't see it coming, and talking about it. That's what's interesting. That's why I feel like it's so kind of like organic and musical and fluid. There were so many different ways that I felt like it could go. But hearing you talk about it, it's interesting that I didn't see it coming, because it makes so much sense. I really just didn't know, one, that this guy would possibly be losing his mind without ever having left his apartment, which is a possibility, or very specifically that, and also, that it would expand itself to so much meaning and history and experience, and something so singular and isolated and yet so collective, which is what I think is so captured in the story. And on a personal level, I was in New York during 9/11, which we all have very, very specific, obvious memories of, and how in so many ways the city experienced it, and how inspiring that city can become amidst when confronted with such events. I haven't been in New York at all during the pandemic, and in a way, that's been hard for me, because I have so many friends there, friends that are family to me, that I know that are experiencing it, and also just a kind of an impotent feeling against the experience that they're going through, and not being able to exist in solidarity with that, and also just a kind of need to sort of I don't know what I'm getting at, but just to have read your story, it made me feel closer to the experience that so many people have been surviving in that city, and I guess that was just great.
I think how I make what you say make sense to me is that I was in LA for 9/11, and I had always felt, well, obviously I'm a New Yorker. I was raised and grew up here, but I had felt happy in LA and happy to have left New York. And 9/11 made me realize that I was heartbroken. I never thought I could feel that way about New York, aside from all the other, the horribleness of all the other actual human tragedy, But New York seems to feel to you and feels to me like a person almost that has feelings.
Oh yeah.
And that's kind of what I was getting at a little bit in this guy's madness. He sees the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building flirting. He sees the windows coming.
Which is the way it feels,
Yes.
Which is the way it feels when you see this. You said earlier that people sort of people say that New York is a lonely city, and I don't know how lonely you feel it can be, but I don't. I at a certain point, it started to, after being there for a certain amount of time and staying there, it started to feel like the only place that wasn't lonely. You know, where like there were so many different things that could, you know, penetrate your reality or whatever you were going through. You had no choice. Say you wake up depressed or anxious about something, and then you go outside and it's snowing and it's freezing, and you've got to get to the train, and you're taken out of your own sort of like, you know,
True.
You're taken out of your mind, and that helped me a lot. I always find that I'm in much more existential crisis when I'm like in a place like Los Angeles than when I am in New York. In that there's so many confrontations that happen that will take you out of your own bullshit, I guess.
I think
or true, whatever.
That's a brilliant observation. You froze though.
Yeah, like did I freeze?
You're frozen on a gesture. To me, anyway.
Am I frozen?
Can anybody else?
Am I?
Say whether he's frozen? Oh, there you are. You're back.
Does it come back?
You're back.
Am I back? I wasn't frozen. I just want to stay like this.
You were just.
We're gonna do the rest. We're gonna do the rest of it like this.
Yoga pose.
It could be my sort of unreliable internet in this isolated, mysterious place I am in Chile.
I heard it all. So that's good. And I wanted to say I get it. I get what you're saying, and I think, you know, I certainly have experienced both sides of that. One, you know, you talk about like having to get somewhere in the snow. You know, you're going to deal with all these other people having to get somewhere in the snow, and all of a sudden, you know, you're not so special, and it's not such.
Not about you, yeah.
Yeah, it's not such a big deal. Whatever is happening to you, everybody's got to get somewhere. And in LA, you know, you're in your car, you've got your music that you've already chosen, you're in your bubble. Yeah, you're pretty special. Nobody's going to take you out of that. And I think you're right.
Exactly.
It's probably
helpful. Sort of Los Angeles is much more capable of sustaining
a bubble.
Your own little reality, and how important your experience is.
Yeah. But some of what you were saying made me want to get back to saying something about you know, what I said earlier about your process, or whatever, your pain as an artist, and which I respect, which I love, you know, which is like, wow, you know, you take this pain and you turn it into entertainment, you know, not entertainment, but you turn it into, you know, something that can reach people. That's what more beautiful thing could you do, you know? So what we have in Ridley is a guy who kind of thinks he might be an artist. You know, he's like doing these photographs in the beginning, and then you get to the point where he remembers 9/11, and he gets caught up into this vortex of world suffering, of injustice, of people who are buried in Central Park, of people who have been stashed in the reservoir, of ballots being stashed in the reservoir, and all these conspiracy type things. And he talks about it, and there's a joke in the Audible about, you know, a guy goes into the woods hunting bear, and the bear becomes the symbol of tragedy or of danger or of like intensity. You know, the bear in the joke, he's either going to kill you or fuck you, is what it says in the joke.
Yeah.
And the bear in this Audible is, you know, one bear is 9/11, one bear is the pandemic, one bear is this, all the other conspiracies. They're all bears because they bring you into the moment. They make you suffer with great intensity, and that suffering joins you to everybody else in the world who is suffering. And that's the truth of it all. And yet, because he's not an artist, the question is, like, the artist can live with it. The artist, like the bear for the artist, is what he needs. It's kind of what you need in a way. You know, as much as you hate it, you know, you want to feel good. but you also know on some way you got to respect the bear, the intensity of it. And it's like, who can live with that? Who can live with that? And the choice that sometimes we have to make, either we live in the truth, which is that, if you want to be a Buddhist, life is suffering, and we're all suffering because we're incarnate.
In the clarity of truth, it's something that you bring up so well in the story, where Ridley is talking about how much the experience of 9/11 connected him to his wife and to his daughter, and the purity of his realization that this is really the only thing that matters at the end of the day. And then it was incredible to say that it was something that only lasted a couple of years, at least the presence of it in the way that it was able to kind of like dominate and nurture, his existence. And that I found that to be so true. And then these things kind of fade and we go back into shit that doesn't matter.
Right.
And that was so well articulated. And it's funny when you talk about process and the way that I guess you and I really could connect as friends, because we both, cared about what we were, doing on the project as a whole on that day. And you're right. I guess caring is painful.
It is. What's the alternative?
Yeah, exactly. What's the alternative? But with Ridley, something that you said earlier, I guess I didn't ever realize that he may be a person who is not a realized artist, whatever that means exactly, but he doesn't maybe feel like he has come into full identity of meaning. Is that something that has to do, is that intentional? Is that part of why his kind of isolation and searching ends up like, I guess, I was going to say fracturing, but it isn't that really. It's such a kind of linear, in a way, although unexpected, it is a very kind of linear path to his death.
Yeah.
And is that part of that? Is that his searching as does that have a lot to do with his searching as an artist, not just a man, a father, a citizen of New York City, but as an artist?
Well, I think, again, because I was surprised where it went. I think I wanted to kind of make this guy, it's hard when you're writing because, you want to write what you know, and, how many times can you write about a writer? How many times can I write about an actor? I don't know that many other, I have to research. I have, that's why writing is so hard. Good writing is so hard. So I wanted to write about a guy who'd been on Wall Street and thought he had some artistic leanings, and now he was kind of pursuing that through these photographs. And, in a way, I started by being ironic towards him in my mind, which was like, you hear all these people that say, yeah, I could be an actor, or yeah, I could be an artist, or who can't be a photographer? And I don't happen to agree with that, So I kind of saw him as one of these hedge fund guys who's like, yeah, I like to buy art, yeah, I can make it. Yeah, I'm artistic in a way. And then I think what it turned into is this almost like dream landscape where his sickness is actually going to open him up into art. His pain, whether it's the virus or his loneliness or whatever, is actually going to make him an artistic sensibility. Whether or not he's a good artist or not, we don't know. But it is that suffering and that pain, finally, him opening himself up to that again, with the memory of 9/11 as well, it being one time when he was open to it before, is what gives him an artistic sensibility. And I had no intention of writing any of that stuff, or even of God damn it, I had no intention of like connecting the dots by saying what I said to you at first about how I appreciate how you suffer and turn it into something else. I guess it's something I'm a little obsessed with, or that I write to. But that's definitely what was in this story. That I originally kind of thought, yeah, I'm going to kind of take the piss out of this kind of Wall Street guy, you know.
Right. Interesting.
And then I stopped, and then I was like, no, man, he's a human being, and he's growing, and now he's dying, and that's sad, to grow right before you die.
Yeah, like his biggest growth spurt is directly related to his
being sick. Yeah. And I think there's, I mean, certainly there were precursors in my mind. Death in Venice being probably the most obvious one, where you have a lifelong academic, doing silly things in Venice, eating strawberries that he shouldn't eat, and becoming kind of a sensualist at the end of his life, falling in love with a beautiful young boy from afar.
Yeah.
Putting on makeup and, just from the outside, making himself a ridiculous figure, but from the inside, for the first time, getting out of his head and into his body. And so certainly that was kind of floating around in my mind. Rear Window, that kind of thing, the congestion kind of leading to that. And those were the other things. But certainly Death in Venice, which is one of the great short stories of all time.
Oh yeah.
And
it reminds me also a little bit of Daphne du Maurier's short story that they turned into a movie with that I think we've talked about with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie.
Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now.
Oh,
the short story isn't called Don't Look Now.
I never read the short story. I love that movie. I had no sense of that in my head when I was writing this. But
because you haven't read the short story.
I'll read it.
It's directly related to obviously, as you know in the movie, directly related to a personal tragedy, and then on a vacation, also very. I think it's in Venice.
It is in Venice,
Italy, and it's very related to. It is. They go to Venice, right?
Well, in the movie, they do. Yeah.
They do. Yeah, I think that's what happens in this. I think it's Venice in the story, so it's also very much like New York City is the story, and yours, Death in Venice.
Right.
Thomas Mann. Rear Window. They're characters that shape so much. They're almost sort of like the central characters of it is New York. The city is as much of a central character as Ridley is in your story.
Well, I guess you could say that Venice, pursuing that kind of image system further, Venice is constantly in threat of going underwater. I think that's probably why it's so evocative to writers. You have this beautiful city that it seems to be doomed to be entirely submerged, like a person's unconscious. In a way.
There was something I wrote down. I was like, when I started to read your story, I was like gonna take notes, through the whole thing, but I just ended up enjoying myself so much. It's like only at the start did I write a couple of things down, but there was one thing that I did want to ask. When Ridley's quotes his mother, and she says the morgue is full of optimists. Explain that to me.
I just made that up. As I was, I think it's the only time, Ridley thinks of his mother singing lullabies to him. Yeah, I thought it sounded like something my mother would say, but she never said it. It just means that, even optimists die. That's all.
Right. Oh, I see.
It doesn't matter how optimistic you are, you're going to end up in the morgue.
Right. Oh, okay. All right, good. And then there was another part of it that, again, I have no question, but in addressing it, maybe you can talk about it. Yeah. And we've covered it somewhat, but when you wrote that, Ridley was lonely and also wanting to be alone, and the way those two things exist alongside one another, it's like perfectly describing my reality.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm so lonely, and then you're in a place and you're starting, it's like, Jesus, I just need to be alone.
That's so funny because I have this wonderful mentor, professor at Princeton, who's still there, a woman named Maria Di Battista, and I always send her my stuff. I mean, I gave her papers when I was 18, and I still wait, like, oh, what is she gonna think? And she also responded to that line,
right,
as something she could relate to, and certainly I relate to it. That's probably why I put it in Ridley's mind. I just think if you're if you're artistic or sensitive in some way, you're a little fractured. You're a little self-conscious. You're a little observing, and there's a certain kind of loneliness to that because you're not fully in the moment. And there's a certain kind of sense. Certainly for me, I'm always like, I've got to get home and process this. What's happening right now?
Right.
I don't know what's happening. I need to be alone to figure out what this thing is, and take myself out of it to figure out what it is. And, I think that, again, that's just the curse of the type of soul or the type of consciousness you have.
The curse of caring.
It would be the or of knowing, of understanding, of getting to the bottom. And again,
wanting to know and wanting to understand.
Wanting to get to the bottom, which is, again, I'll bring it back to Ridley. He wants to get to the bottom of the reservoir, and at the bottom of the Central Park Reservoir, he actually gets to in his mind, gets to the beginning of time. Like that. Like that sequence in 2001: Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Star Child. It was like
absolutely. Where I can. That's such a great reference, because that's what I sort of imagined in reading it, and I'm sure in hearing it. I just want to say also, this might take us totally off topic, but in thinking about your in observing you, as I have before we ever met, and now that I know you and that we're friends, and then I'm getting to know another layer of your work, there's something that I've always admired and aspired to in that is a sort of effortlessness, so there's never sort of like an unbelievable moment. It's all very honest, and that happens a lot in performance. And so that being said, knowing that that this story and your previous books, especially Truly Like Lightning, that you're reading it and that you can experience auditorily, from your voice, makes me want to hear them, and also makes me want to ask you to read every book that
The answer is no. I will not.
I'm going to send you a stack.
The answer is hell no. But you know what you make me think of, and I thought you were going in another direction. I thought you were going to say, what does it feel like to be somebody who is self-conscious, to try and portray unself-consciousness, which is what we try to do. Which is what we try to be as actors. And obviously we're portraying some people who are self-conscious, and that's
sure.
But the actor, him or herself, has got to have a certain level of unself-consciousness. So that's where I was thinking, and for me, that's why when I discovered acting at a kind of a late age, mid-late 20s, 27, 26, 27, it was like, oh my God, it was like the aspiration is to give up that self-consciousness. That's what I'm trying to do. The thing that I've been burdened with my entire life, in these few moments between action and cut, I get to not have, you know, or that's the goal of not having that. I felt, that's why I think I felt like I was home for the first time when I first started that. It was like, oh my God, that whole thing happened, and I wasn't thinking. I was
It's interesting. That's fascinating, because I have such a different experience in that I kind of started, putting this, dream together at a very young age, because I was consuming so many movies. I was going to so many movies, and to want to be in them, and what that would mean in terms of, like, basically, I think I would have been a really bad child actor, like really bad, because my early ideas about it were so performance related and had such superficial understanding of it all. And it was kind of a painful process for me to shed that and to understand it, to have to go so much deeper in the way that Ridley does, and like in the Reservoir, and all of these, the way that the layers kind of reveal themselves into more and more unknowing, really.
Yeah.
And for me, the interesting process of, like, it becoming this kind of fantasy, and then a hobby, I guess, of interest that my parents were tolerant of. And because fine, like, if I didn't want to swim anymore, I wanted to do this, and as long as it kept me out of the house and not in front of the television, then they were fine with it. And then it turning into a study and a training, and then ultimately being confronted with the fact, is this an art form for you? Are you willing to go that deep and to know so little and to risk so much, so that you can tell a story,
Yeah.
And so that's something that I feel like I really had to fight for, and then and also, of course, feel that we never really achieved completely to satisfaction.
Can you? How could you ever feel that way?
No, of course.
It's baked in that you're not going to feel that way. And that's what keeps you going. I mean, if you felt that way, you'd probably stop, or you'd be crappy. You wouldn't be fun to watch.
When we see this, I bet I'm really good in the movie that we just did together. I bet that'll be the first one.
You are. You'll see.
But it was just interesting to hear it put that way.
Yeah.
And that's totally what it is. And I think that, I guess I just mean to say, to stay on topic as best as I can, that I'd really like to hear you read something directly related to the film.
No.
Directly related. You already said no, so I'm just gonna have to listen to your books. But I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that, especially after having read the Reservoir.
What you do is you buy them, you spend your hard-earned money, and you put it in my pocket, and then
I'm 100%
the same.
I'm 100% okay with that.
I think,
like I said, I did a couple of audiobooks. It's something that I particularly enjoy doing, is reading aloud. It helps me a lot. And this is something, to be really honest, I love writing. It's not something I've been doing at all in these last few years, but I used to, I guess, when I felt so much more far away from the things that I wanted or thought that I wanted. Writing was such a way of giving myself something that I wanted. I guess in my heart, if that makes any sense. And anyway, I would read it aloud constantly to anyone that would listen, to kind of like either keep going with the story or to look for affirmation or to see what people thought and everything. So I can I just admire that you've done that with your books. And in your novel, Truly Lightning, you even use music that your son.
In the audiobook, yeah.
In the audiobook, you're like original music from your son?
Well, I mean, it's just like 10, 15 seconds. He was just like noodling. That's all they need. You know, they kind of play it in and they play it out. And yeah, he was just noodling on his electric guitar one day. And I said, that's really nice. Let's record that. And I just recorded it on my phone. And then when we were talking about doing the audio book, I was talking to the producers of that. And they said, you know, do you have any music in mind? And I said, well, what about this? And I just played them. Because it was kind of Western. It was a little twangy. It was a little cowboy sounding, which fit the book. And they ended up putting it in there. And of course, you know, he wants to know when he's going to get paid. He still hasn't gotten paid.
All right, cool.
I think we've gone like almost an hour. I think we're good. Does anybody want to come in and?
This makes me miss you a lot.